Good evening. I'm Jennifer Larson, President of Friends of Chamber Music. I'm so happy to have with me tonight the four saxophone players that comprise the Kenari Quartet. They are the last ensemble in the Friends of Chamber Music series. They will be playing a performance on Monday, April 4th in Page Hall at 7:30 p.m. We have just one more Zoom left after this one, and this will be a conversation with Alejandro Madrid, who is the author of a book on Pulitzer Prize winning Cuban American composer Tanya León. So, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to have you here to join us. I'm going to just introduce each of you one by one. And maybe you would tell something about your earliest musical memory. Okay, so we're going to start with Bob Eason.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much. Um, my first musical memory, I think, would have to be. I remember sitting in my parents' living room when I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, and there was like maybe like a New Year's Eve special on TV, and I remember just seeing someone playing the saxophone, and I couldn't tell you what it was or who it was, but to this day, that's kind of just like my first kind of like musical moment. When I remember thinking that that was just a really cool thing, and I had always wanted to do that since.
Okay, let's see. We'll go to Kyle next.
Hi there, I'm Kyle. I'm the alto saxophonist of the group, and pleasure to be here. Um, One of the earlier musical memories that I have that I can remember is when I was young. A family friend would often pick me up from school, and she was very much a heavy jazz listener. She listened to a lot of jazz music, and so every time that she would pick me up, she would have some sort of music going on in the car that was from all different genres of jazz, and relevantly, one of which was a lot of Coltrane was really big in terms of my earliest sort of musical memories and being able to really kind of associate music with music performers. And so that sticks with me very much. So yeah, John Coltrane and being picked up by a family friend after school.
What a nice way to to get introduced to music. Corey.
Yeah, in a similar fashion, my parents always listened to jazz music around the house, and so my earliest memories are like music related. My dad would play the piano at home. There's a picture even of me. Like he's sitting there playing the piano, and I'm like really tiny on next to him, like tinkling on the high keys. Um, so we had a pretty like kind of musically active household. And it's funny, I didn't start playing saxophone until I was like 10. I didn't develop like a specific interest in playing it until around then. But there is a picture of me, I think when I'm like 4 years old, opening a Christmas present that has like a little toy saxophone in it. So I guess I technically started playing then. Um,
Um, and last but not least, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks. So my, I guess, first and most formative musical memories were just being in church. My grandfather was an AME pastor, and he was on the pulpit of the church that I went to growing up, and we went every single Sunday. And so hearing those songs and singing in the choir, all of that was really my introduction to music. But also my mom was an elementary school music teacher, so there was music in the house as well. So yeah,
You couldn't escape it.
right.
So I'm always interested, well, I'm interested in things that people can do as citizens or as administrators or to encourage the growth of music into the future, or at least the continuation of music into the future. And so I'm interested in the formal experiences people have early on that really helped them gain some skills that then they could apply. So that's my next question, and you can just pop in whenever you like on this one. What were your first formal experiences with music? Whether was it lessons? You've already mentioned choir. Whether you had a band that began in fourth or fifth grade, or
Well, I started taking piano lessons when I was about 5 years old. And I took piano lessons from 5 up until I started playing the saxophone in 6th grade. Um, and so, I mean, for me, that was hugely substantial, just, kind of developing, that creative outlet, from very early on. And then when I picked up the saxophone, I kind of hit the ground running, and, felt like I had kind of already developed a little bit in that sense.
Mhm. It's really interesting to me how one instrument transfers over to another so easily. Like, I've seen that before. Someone who starts on the piano and then changes to the cello, or starts on the violin, then changes to the piano. That it's something. It's that musical ability begins in the brain somehow, more than in the fingers or the embouchure. Um, yeah. Um, how many of you play the piano as well as saxophone? Did you have to do secondary piano in college or in conservatory?
I was lucky enough that my 10 years of piano lessons helped me test out of it.
um, so I remember, because I play the flute, just not well any longer, but I play the flute. And I remember the day that I showed up at school and they had the instrument museum. And we got to go around and we got to pick an instrument. And that was when I picked the flute. Um, did you have that kind of experience in school? Is that how you started playing in school?
Well, for me, I remember wanting, this was in middle school. I remember wanting to start with the saxophone. And I think it was just because it looked cool. I think it was just all the keys and,
Uh-huh.
shiny and, I think that was why. But there weren't enough, or there were too many saxophonists that had already signed up.
Mhm.
So the band director sort of made me play clarinet. And so I did that for I think a full year, and then eventually I was probably complaining to my mom all the time,
Mhm.
and so we went to the music store and we sort of just did what we weren't supposed to do and rented a saxophone and just sort of brought it in, and we're like, tough to the band director. So so that just sort of happened like that. But sometimes I look back and I'm like, darn, should have done the clarinet. But I also really like the saxophone, of course.
um, I want you to tell me your favorite ensemble or early ensemble memory. Um,
Well, when I played in middle and high school, I did the all-state kind of honor band type things. Those were always a real fun um experience, just having like all of these really talented and excited individuals there in the same place, but for making music. And really, like, an extension of that turned into or is my I did 1 year of public high school, and then the rest of high school, I went to the North Carolina School of the Arts, which is like a boarding arts high school. And that was just like an extension of that environment where, you're constantly surrounded by not just musicians, but artists of all kinds who are just really passionate about what they're doing. And that experience was actually the first year that I was there was the first year that I uh, kind of came to the realization that music could be a career, like a viable career option. And because I had never really thought of it that way before, I just thought it was fun and something I like to do. But once I got to that environment, it was just like, oh yeah, it has to be this.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. It seems like for every artist, there comes a time when they see other artists and they think, I am one of them. This is something I can become. What I'm going to go to Stephen, because I know you also went to the UNC School of the Arts in North Carolina. Um, yeah, can you share something about that? When you first felt like this was something you could do as a career, or that you were part of a community of other people who also did it.
Yeah. So I think that I'm pretty sure that that sort of developed at the School of the Arts as well for me. Um, there was a moment actually before I got there when the teacher of both Corey and me, Tamar Sullivan, came to my, high school jazz band class, and he played this solo soprano saxophone piece for us, and I was just totally enamored. And so that I think was the moment that I knew that I had that sort of like light bulb thing where it was like, oh wow, like that's something special, that's something different. Um, and then going to the School of the Arts there was just, I mean, there was that element of, all these people are really passionate about it, but I think there was also the element that everyone there was really willing to work for it too. Like that was so cool. We had we called ourselves the Coffee Pot Club, and we all went to go practice at 6 in the morning. We would like knock on each other's doors and like go and do that. And it's like, those people are in the National Symphony, they're soloists, they're with American Ballet Theater, and just all sorts of different things. Um, and being around so many people that um, were willing to do that is something that absolutely like still sticks with me now. And I think I'm really lucky to have had that experience, at that point. So yeah, it's a great and very special place.
Yeah, I love the campus. And
Yeah.
just, I think it's a gorgeous place. Um, so I know that, Bob, you're from Texas, right? And you came up through the Texas school programs. Um, I I don't know too much about the Texas school programs, except that I know that a lot of really great saxophone players and wind ensembles come from Texas.
Yeah,
Every
for
year there are more.
yeah. I th- uh, I think honestly it all started with how well funded football is in Texas, um,
Ah,
and kind of like marching band going along with that, but kind of on an offshoot of that. And one of the really great things is that because of that, the music programs are often also really well funded. Um, but it's interesting that it is very closely tied to sports. Um, but yeah, my middle school and high school band experiences were just absolutely incredible. I had some just absolutely tremendous teachers and mentors throughout the whole process. Um, I remember after my freshman year of high school, one of my band directors kind of just sitting me down and saying, like, you could really do this as a career if you want to. And in my mind, I was like, oh, you really think so? Um, and I just remember that being just a really wonderful experience. I think Texas bands just in general a really high standard for competition, and I think the level that it's promoted to is just really an incredible thing. I was reading a statistic the other day with the Texas Music Educators Association, all state band and orchestra organizations. Um, I think something like 85% of the students who make all state end up getting like within the top like 10 to 15% of SAT scores, in kind of relationship to the country. Um, some of my best friends who made all state in high school are now lawyers and doctors. It's this just really wonderfully competitive thing that I think everyone really benefits from here.
It prepares you for all sorts of things. Yeah. Do any of you keep in contact with your high school band teacher? Uh, you do.
I do. Actually, I was visiting my parents over my spring break, and I sent a message to one of my middle school band directors just to see if he would be available to get coffee, and he was like, actually, I'm playing with this community jazz band, at 7:30 on Tuesday night, and I went and we had a great time. It was great.
That's really wonderful. I wrote when both of my sons are musicians, and when it dawned on me that how useful it was that I knew how to read music, because they're both violinists. Um, I wrote a long letter to my high school band teacher telling him how much I appreciated the work he put into all of us that allowed me to be able to pass this on. I could never have done it without him. And he just recently died. So his name is Don Adamson. And he meant a lot to all of us, for sure. Um, so, Kyle, you're from California, is that right? What was music education like in California for you? You're from Fresno, or are you from?
Yeah, I originally I'm from a small town west of Fresno called Squaw Valley, which is kind of in the foothills of the Kings Canyon National Park. But I went to school in the Clovis/Fresno school district, which is kind of in the Central Valley of California, so right in the middle. And my musical experience with through the school system was quite positive as well. Um, it was a relatively smaller community in the sense of there were 3 or 4 high schools within my district, and everyone kind of knew each other in that regard, and so there was a lot of collaboration. There was a lot of connecting with students from other schools and connecting with educators from other schools. And one of my most kind of impactful mentors for myself, Larry Honda, who's a dear friend of Otis Murphy, who I studied with in college, taught at a different school than I did, but through various connections and events, I got to know him and eventually started taking private lessons with him, and then took private lessons with Paul Lucchese, and which was another educator from a different school. And so there was a lot of different kind of again, kind of this collaboration amongst these a relatively smaller community within the Central Valley. And they had eventually kind of led me towards pursuing the California All-State Band, which was also one of those moments where you start for a smaller community where it kind of it explodes in the sense of now you start to see players from all over the state of California, which is not as big as Texas, but is also one of the biggest states in the country. And so you start to realize how large the music scene is in California, and that was a really big eye opener for me too at that age. And so yeah, through elementary school all the way up through high school, it was a very positive, supportive, and a very influential time for me as a musician, for sure.
Before we go further, we had a question from Shay, who is helping behind the scenes who is a saxophone player. Um, and the question was, when it came time to pick your professional instrument, what did you do? You play different kinds? Do you all play the same brand? Or what were the things you considered? Um, yeah, what goes into picking a professional instrument?
Um, I think that that's going to be a different answer for all of us. And there's different levels uh, of technicality that we can get into that perhaps we will spare to a certain degree. But for myself, in terms of my experience and perspective, and when I decided to invest in a professional level instrument was a very big decision, because of course that's a large expense. And for me, it was actually a group effort, in the sense of I wanted input, not only of course from myself and how the horn felt with me, but also from my family members. I wanted input from my peers and the people around me, and of course at the time my teacher, Otis Murphy. And I had a lot of support from him. I had a lot of support from my studio. I remember I was very fortunate in the sense that Otis Murphy has particular connections with Yamaha, that brand, and so they were able to send a number of saxophones, and I was able to try a few of them and find one that fits best for me. And without getting into the technical details, for me, it was very much about finding a horn that felt comfortable in the sense of kind of in every sense, and at how it plays, how it fits in your hands, how heavy it is, and making that leap from saying, this is the horn I want to spend the next potentially rest of my musical career with, is a big thing. And so when you have that support from everyone around you, that can be a really important thing to consider. So for folks who are thinking about investing in a professional level horn, I always like to recommend have as many eyes and ears with you as you can, and so that you're not making the decision completely by yourself, and you have that support there, because it is a big decision. And so and if there are any like technical aspects that anyone is interested in knowing, we can of course speak to that too. But in terms of a higher level general, that was my approach, was very much leaning on the people around me and being confident in that big next step. For sure.
So unlike something like the clarinet, right? Clarinetist has to change their clarinet periodically. They don't stay with the same clarinet through their whole career. Um, a saxophone is one that you could play if you had the right one. You could potentially play it your whole career. Is that right?
Yeah, I think Corey could speak best to that.
I would say for most professional saxophonists, it's probably fairly uncommon for someone to play on the same instrument, for that long. Most people change instruments every few years or so. Just like any other instrument you might think of that does that. I am an example of someone who's actually played on the same horn since, I don't know, like the third or fourth year that I started playing. And it just so happens that that model, it's a Selmer Series 2 tenor saxophone, and it is a professional level instrument, and I was fortunate enough to be able to get that really early on. And something interesting that has kind of worked out for me, we might end up talking about this more later, but as someone who's primarily a composer now, and who doesn't perform solo but only performs performances with quartet periodically, being able to come back to the same instrument that I've just known and has become part of my body essentially makes it really, really it really facilitates being able to manage that type of playing, where you're not playing every day, but when you come together, every couple months or so for a professional gig, you're able to get back up to that level that you need to be in order to, you know, make the group be what the group is. So it certainly is possible to you know, pick an instrument early on and just have it, you know, assimilate into yourself and just you know, kind of live with it like that. But I would say it's relatively uncommon.
Mhm. So here's a question that I've wondered about. I know that um, some saxophonists play all the saxophones, like soprano all the way up to Barry or whatever. Do you all play all the saxophones, or was there a point where you decided you would specialize on alto or on tenor?
Well, I think that we all certainly can play all of the saxophones that you mentioned, and even further in both directions. You know, it'd be possible to play them. Um, for me, I play all of them like pretty regularly, and I like to try to, you know, like commission repertoire and write repertoire for the instruments that don't have the most, you know, so mainly like tenor and Barry and those. So that's something that I'm sort of passionate about, is having, you know, the next generation of saxophonists just having something to play on those other instruments. Because a lot of times quartet is the only, you know, place to do that. And then sometimes that um the effect of that is that students, you know, that are playing tenor for the first time in a quartet, or baritone for the first time in a quartet, like maybe their level isn't as high on the instrument.
Mhm.
um and so, I mean, you know, like with Corey, we got really lucky because he was like a tenor specialist, and it's like, well, where do you find one of those? So um yeah, so I think it's different for everyone, but of course we all could and probably have, you know, played all of them, you know, at some point.
Mhm. Um, so you guys all went to Indiana University. Would you, Indiana is a powerhouse in saxophone, and really a powerhouse in music for sure. Um, tell me about Indiana. What was it? What is it that makes it so great for saxophonists and saxophone ensembles?
Well, one of some of my fondest memories from being at school in Bloomington. I think at the core, it's just the depth of the school. There are so many students, and you know that for some people that might be a turnoff because the school is so big. But for me, it was the opposite. You know, having so many people to get to know who are just as passionate about music as I was. Um, you know, the saxophone studio was pretty big. It's not uncommon for the IU saxophone studio to have 3 or 4 quartets going at any given time. Um,
Oh.
and I think at most colleges, universities, you probably have 1 or 2, maybe at the most. So there was just such kind of a rich culture of everybody really getting in the thick of it. Um, for me, that was the best thing. Is just having so many people to kind of be around who were just really incredible. I remember the when I went to audition at IU for my master's degree. I actually, I don't know if Corey, if I've ever told you this, but Corey was playing in the little recital. For every audition weekend, the saxophone studio puts together a little recital, and there's like a sandwich tray, and there's like cheese and crackers, and it's just a good moment for everyone to kind of mingle. You know, after they've played their audition, they can relax a little bit and talk to people. Um, but I remember sitting in the little audience, and Corey played one of his compositions. He played Starbits, and I remember hearing Corey play that, and then being like I don't know if I can hang here. Like I don't think I can. I don't think I'll be able to make it. So I mean, really, really, just so many really incredible musicians.
And it's sort of an oasis as well, you know. Um, yeah, I think it's one of my favorite schools for sure. For anything, you know, music aside. So you had some really great mentors, and you had some really great mentors at Indiana University. Um, so this is a question about mentors. What has made a good mentor for you? Did you learn things from them that now that you are in a position to mentor others that you apply?
Well, yeah, I mean, this sort of is related to the previous question and this one. I think mentors can come in all different, sort of shapes and sizes and can influence you in so many different ways. Um, I think that one of the interesting things with our teacher at Indiana, Otis Murphy, um, he was a very funny person just in general. But I think he instilled a certain value of like the saxophone needs to have a you have to really pay attention to your sound. Like you really have to be intentional about every last detail of what's coming out of your instrument. And through all of the stuff that he would talk about, that is the thing that I really feel like I took away from him, and I think is something that as a group we really value, and that has we've often gotten comments that it sort of sets us apart sometimes, is just how much people can tell that we're really focusing on making the saxophone sound as appropriate for the repertoire as we possibly can. Um, and then I also had another teacher um, who has been incredibly, important to me in both, musically, but also in other ways. So, my teacher from Northwestern and the School of the Arts, Tamor Sullivan, he's he's that kind of person that's like, like a ride or die kind of person, like he's just always there. It's like, okay, I'm trying to get a job and my CV doesn't look very good or whatever. And he will be on the phone with you at 10:30 at night, like, you need to move this over here, your margins on the side, or, whatever, and things like that. And, if there's ever anything that you're doing, like he's gonna show up, he's gonna be there. And, it's almost like this lifelong connection and friendship. But I think both of those are incredibly valuable. So there's all different ways of sort of being a mentor and having mentors.
Hmm. Well, and you're now a saxophone professor at Ithaca College, right? And are you one of those that is always there?
Um, I I think that I try to strike a balance, I guess, because now that I'm on the other side, and I'm sure Bob can attest to this as well. Um, you really, being a music teacher is like a very emotional thing. Like it takes a lot of emotional investment, and you really care about your students, and so you really have to like, um, you have to. I like to think of it as the students that I can tell are really going for it. I am that person that's always there.
Mhm.
Um, because it's hard when you're like really really trying to get someone to do something, and it's like, oh well, maybe they're really not that that interested, or they're not that
Mhm.
into it. And then that makes you, that like is emotional, for you as the teacher. um,
Mhm.
so I try to be that as much as I can.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Um, so I should have backed up a little bit about with this question. Um, so you are classical saxophonist, which is different from being a jazz saxophonist. And I remember when I first met Corey, you told me you were a classical saxophonist. You were 14 when I first met you. And I thought, there's such a thing as a classical saxophonist? I really didn't know. But it is a distinct thing. I mean, I assume some of you also play some jazz as well, right? But would you talk about this choice that you made to go into the classical genre versus pop or jazz? I
Yeah.
mean,
For oh, sorry.
no, it's a niche for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it's interesting. Considering that I grew up listening to mostly jazz, related types of music. But as as I kind of like matured throughout my childhood and into adolescence and everything, I started getting really interested in other types of music, particularly something I'm very fond of still to this day is video game music. Um, and like there's video game music, film music. I also got really into like wind band repertoire and stuff like that. And then when I first heard Tamer Sullivan play, our Stephen and I's teacher from North Carolina School of the Arts, playing classical saxophone, just the idea of this whole expanse of contemporary repertoire for the saxophone, that really intrigued me, and to hear Tamer like make the instrument sound the way that he did. I wasn't used to hearing the saxophone sound like that before, and I thought it was awesome, and I was like, yeah, I want to do this, because that's kind of where the inspiration came from. But at the same time, I did play some jazz up until college, and the reason that I particularly did not go into jazz was because I am someone who needs like direction and guiding. And when you are spending most of your time having to practice improvising and it's all really self-directed, like I just can't I can't do it. So I'm just talking in terms of improvisation, like in a traditional jazz context with chord changes and playing certain licks and things like that. And our quartet is starting to branch out into like some free improv type things, and I love that kind of stuff. So I think that's really cool, but not jazz like per se is not quite my wheelhouse anymore as a performer. Compositionally, that's another story.
So I had this is a technical question, um, and, and it may be a stupid question. There are saxophonists who do not believe in vibrato. Are you vibrato or no vibrato, and or some of each?
Well, I think for us that we're a pro vibrato quartet.
I prefer vibrato. Um,
Well, I was just going to say, there's a time and a place for everything. There are certainly moments that you'll hear in our performance where we'll purposefully play with a straight tone without vibrato, and it's definitely for an intended effect. But definitely a pro vibrato quartet.
that's good to know. I witnessed a master class in Abu Dhabi. And the person giving the master class was encouraging the student. This was at NYU Abu Dhabi. Encouraged the student to play with vibrato, and the saxophone professor really got upset. No vibrato. He was a non-vibrato, and I just thought it was really unusual that I'd never heard of such a thing, to be so hardcore about that. So that was. And he's an amazing player. I heard him play later, all this extended technique stuff. So he has his particular style. So I'm going to talk about how you decided you were the proper musical partners. Were you just looking for other players? Was it accidental that you just managed to get together, and did you hear something or feel something that said, yes, this feels right, I think we have possibility? What was that process like?
Well, it's funny now. It's like we've been together for a while, so it's funny like how it's harder to think back now, actually, in some ways. But so Corey's a little bit older than I am, and when and I knew that he was at Indiana, and so when I decided to go to Indiana, I of course knew that I wanted to work with Corey at some point, and I wasn't sure like how it was going to happen or whatever. But um, I think after um, yeah, I think I got placed on Barry in band or something like that on the baritone saxophone in band, and Corey heard that, or maybe I also subbed with another quartet on Barry, um, and Corey heard that, and so we sort of had this idea of like, wouldn't it be cool if we could be tenor and Barry in a quartet at some point, maybe next year or whatever. And then so the next year we were sort of looking at the incoming class, and we saw that Bob was coming, that he had such fantastic experience already with saxophone quartets, and that he was obviously an amazing player. I think I had heard him, or maybe we had both heard him at the North American Saxophone Alliance competition the year before, and we're blown away. And so we reached out to Bob, and Bob was like, "Are y'all serious? Y'all like really want to do a quartet for real, for real?" Um, and of course we did. So we came together, and then when Kyle joined the group, we actually had an audition, and Kyle came in and really laid it down, and played super well. And also it was just personally such a great relationship, and rehearsing was fun, and rehearsing is still fun, and all of that. And so um it really Kyle really sort of fit like a glove in that way. And so yeah, I think that's the origin story. I don't know if I'm getting any of that wrong.
But that it felt fun, and it felt like you were all committed, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we actually also had, we had played with some other alto players as well, and there was this sense of camaraderie, both musically and personally, that was like apparent like pretty immediately, when Kyle was playing with us. So yeah.
I'm going to tell you about my first memory of hearing you play. I heard you with the previous other saxophonist in 2013, and then I heard you all in 2015. And the thing that I noticed immediately was that you have a sound together that is so perfectly balanced. um, some saxophone quartets are choreographed, and they stand and they play without the music, and they do all of this whole thing that's really a show to watch. But you were so about the music, such gorgeous um, group sound. So my question to you is how did you deliberately do this? Was there something you were thinking, that you were striving for? How did you develop it? Do you have tips for an ensemble for developing a sound like that? Was it my
Um,
imagination?
no, and thank you so much for the kind words. I mean, that's definitely something that we're quite intentional about, and we want to we're happy that that is coming across. And that ties into a bit of what Stephen was talking about earlier with the influence of Otis Murphy and the influence of that studio at IU, that um, sort of above everything else in terms of technique, tempo, um, extended techniques, everything stems from a singular unit or a singular ideal, which is air and sound. And how do you sound? That's kind of the end all be all. Is you can play as fast as you like, but if it's not the sound that you're going for, then you might need to reevaluate that.
Mhm.
And so that's something that we still spend a very long time, or a very large amount of our time focusing on, is how we sound as a group. and on an individual level, but also as an ensemble. And so in terms of some things that we like to do or approach is, on a mechanical level, we from time to time we will approaching different accessories. We'll try as a group in terms of attachments on the saxophone, reeds, mouthpieces, instruments. We'll approach these things not with the goal of having the same instrument, but with the goal of just seeing what kind of options are out there. But we'll also approach exercises in the same way. We usually start off every rehearsal with an hour of warm-ups and long tones and how are we all articulating. We'll go around individually and just articulate one note, and we have to be as exact and try to match that person as closely as we can. And so that is something that we take very seriously, and so we want to be very, again, intentional with that. And for me personally, and I think this is something that I almost every time that I coach a group will bring up, is something that I think is so helpful in getting a group sound, is actually one of the most simplest concepts that we've come across, which is we like to be very close to each other, like physically on stage, almost touching shoulder to shoulder in some instances, and that small trick of placement can really have a large influence on how your sound is coming together. And so, not only with where you're actually physically located on stage, so you can be strategic, and where we are on stage is very intentional. Stephen stands where he stands for a reason. I stand where I stand for a reason. And so for groups that are exploring group sounds, not only exploring different methods of warm-ups and exercises together, but also explore different ways of physically engaging with each other in terms of being on stage, in terms of where you're placed in the quartet, how far back are you, how far ahead are you. All of these things actually have a pretty large impact. And so with most groups, a lot of groups that I coach, they'll be standing very far apart, and I'll just say, get closer, just get closer. Why are you so far apart? You can't hear each other. And then they get together, and then it completely changes how they sound, and you can listen much more. And so there's a lot of elements that go into that, from more theoretical approaches to the simpler things of just standing closer together. It really helps.
So let's see. Two of you are composers, and one of you is an arranger or beginning to arrange. And here's my question: is when before you became a composer, if you started out as just a player, and then you became a composer, did it change the way you performed or thought about music? What is it for a group to have composers in it?
Well, yeah, for me, it completely changed the way I just think about and interact with music. It's really interesting when I kind of consider that. I had never really composed anything until my freshman year of undergrad at Indiana, when I took an elective. Like, I started just as a saxophone performance major, and I took an secondary elective composition seminar and lessons. And I was like, oh, that'll be a cool way to get some credits. And the format of the class was every week the TA would come in and present just different music from different eras, different genres, and just talk about it compositionally. And then at the end of the week, you would have an individual lesson with him, and over the course of the term, you would compose a piece, and then all of those pieces were performed at the end of the term by student musicians. So it was really an insight into the experience of kind of creating a piece of music from scratch or from whatever you want, and then realizing it and figuring out how best to notate it so that you could give that music to other performers, and then they could realize it in real life. And going through that whole process, and then hearing the final product at the end of just like something I had thought of in my mind, and then here are people like actually making that happen. I just absolutely fell in love with it, and I was like, oh, I have to do this. And I started double majoring in composition after that. And the thing that you were saying or asking about, how does it change the way you think about music? The way that I've kind of had engaged with music up until that point in my life was always purely just on a visceral, like emotional, like immediate level, and almost never in terms of like form or like or like the way that things are put together, or I might hear let's take any one piece of music, say The Rite of Spring by Igor Stravinsky or something. Like I had heard that piece before and I thought it was awesome, but it was only because in the moment I was like, whoa, that's cool, whoa, that's cool, whoa, this sounds cool, like and playing that, or playing a piece that has saxophone in it, and interpreting that at every moment, it's a very immediate, like kind of adrenaline like experience. And that's always how I had engaged with music. But then when I took this class and I started thinking like a composer, I just realized how much depth and like craft and just this whole world of like curiosity and discovery and experience that's to be had in kind of like analyzing music or listening to it in a more like broader form, and like listening to The Rite of Spring and being able to hear like relationships between different things over time, or thinking about how Stravinsky orchestrated the thing, like why are these two instruments playing together here, oh because it makes this sound like that. I just became totally fascinated with that. And and now, and I think that added a lot to my kind of I don't know, perspective as a musician, and certainly bringing that to quartet, where we've played a couple of my pieces before. It's just a different way to consider the art form, and both are equally valid and both have their advantages. And I'm very fortunate that I've been able to kind of live in both of those worlds.
Mm-hmm. So, Stephen, I know you're also a composer.
I guess, yeah.
He's a great one.
I still think of Corey as like a real composer, and I'm like I don't know. No, in many ways, Corey is my composition teacher. I send all of my scores to him. But for me, I think it's interesting because the best way I can describe it is I sort of engage with composition more in the way like a singer-songwriter does. Not in the terms of what I'm actually, creating, but in terms of like, I think that for me and my upbringing in music was always supposed to be very expressive, and it was supposed to be a way of like dealing with life. Like that's literally, like in the gospel tradition, that's what it is. It's like you're singing about like, this is what happened, I hope I can get through the next week, like I've got one more river to cross, like one more whatever. And so going into classical music and getting really sort of into this rigid thing of being a classical musician, and especially a classical saxophonist with all the contemporary music that we play, I got to a point where I felt like I lost the art part or like the expressive communicative part. It's like, okay, I'm turning my metronome on, trying to get to this, metronome marking 144, got to be able to tongue this way and that way. And there were times where I was like, okay, I think I might be done with this. Like, I don't think I really want to play anymore. And, writing, it almost like attacked me in a way. It was like I had to do it. I was like, I need to actually take music and use it as a way to express the things that I feel, not only through the lens of the composer and doing what the composer wants me to do. I think I have things to say too.
Mhm.
And so I just like sat down at a piano and was like, okay, well, let's let's try it out. And um yeah, I think that for me it sort of like completes this circle, you know, in a way. And now it has 100% changed the way that I play, because I realized that when we play music, when we read and play music, we are such we are at such a disadvantage because the only way that a composer can communicate with us is by writing stuff down. And that I've realized in being a composer that writing it down and whatever you're putting on the page is like not the music. Like it's not even close to being the music. And so I take the little all of the little intricacies of like does it have to be exactly this and exactly that? I there I still take those very seriously, obviously, and they do need to be precise, but in a more organic way, and not in a way of staccato means staccato. You know, it's like, well, what does this staccato mean? And you know, if a composer only has a dot and a line for staccato or legato, it's like, okay, there's got to be a wider range of things happening there. So yeah, but yeah, I guess I'm a composer.
So I always wondered what it was like for those who were composing to have their works performed by their group. And so I wanted to know if you have rules about this. Like we'll give any piece one read through. or yeah. Is it nerve-wracking? Do you feel like, oh man, are they gonna like it? How's it gonna sound?
Well, I'll say, you know, the one, well, there's two pieces that of mine that we've played on several occasions, and they both come from entirely different kind of approaches. The one piece is actually the piece that I wrote in that the composition elective course that I mentioned to you. It was a piece for saxophone quartet, and that piece, you know, I didn't know this quartet was not, this was years before that this quartet started, you know, and I was just writing it just to write it, you know. And so the other piece though that we performed was actually a commission from Chamber Music America, that we applied for this grant, the classical commissioning grant, as a quartet, to commission me as a composer to write a piece for the quartet. And so you know, in that case, in writing that piece, I knew that we had to play it. You know, so, fortunately, you know, the guys that heard my music, they liked my music, and the really cool part about that was that I wrote that piece with, like, that I constructed that piece around like all of these different quirky little things that I knew each of us could do. Like Stephen has like this multiphonic singing thing in there. Like Kyle has this like demented whistle thing. Like these aren't even things you do on the instrument. They're just, you know, things that I knew. Oh yeah, he can make that noise. I'm gonna put that in here. Like, you know, and so it was really a piece that I kind of tailored to our unique individual musical selves. And the other cool part about, you know, being able to perform that and write that for the group and perform it with the group, is that, you know, anytime they're like during rehearsals, to have the composer there in the rehearsal with you, like anytime there's a question about anything, it's, we can have a discussion about it, right? You know, there's no guessing this, or I wonder what that means, or the, you know, and there are even things that I had in there that were like kind of complicated and confusing, but I was able to be there and explain, oh, it's like this, or this, you know, it's kind of a little bit weird, a little bit complicated, a little bit of you know, getting out the TI-83 calculator and calculating these irrational meters and stuff. So yeah.
So you threw it at them. So I noticed that it is 8:29, and I have not given anybody who's in the audience a chance to ask any questions. So with the last minute that we have remaining, I'll give people a chance to do that. And while I'm waiting for things to come in the chat, um, I just want to say how thrilled I am that you are here with us this weekend. And I'm looking forward to seeing you work with students on Sunday. So some of the audience who is with us tonight might not know that the Kenari are doing an outreach on Albany's campus. This is the Uptown campus. It's in the student center in the multi-purpose room. And we have 50 students who've worked on films for the writing and critical inquiry class. And these films all incorporate music by the Kenari Quartet. Way back last fall, I had some listening sessions with them, and they chose the music they wanted to use. And it'll be a chance for the Kenari to see their music used. Also, you're going to do a demo, a little performance for them. And everybody's welcome. There's no tickets. Just find your way there at 3 p.m. on Sunday. Okay, well, we don't have any questions in the chat box, but I want to thank you for being here tonight. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you this weekend. And good night, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.